Good evening and welcome back. Here we have another example of trying to use prison as a deterrent for somebody who has decided to join ISIS in the Middle East. Somebody who was born and raised in England, who grew up in London and has been killed in Syria, or at least has died in Syria, because of course they're quoting there to say killed in Syria. He was already imprisoned by the Syrian Democratic Forces, and during, it's uncertain circumstances that maybe he was trying to escape custody, or maybe it was riots going on because they didn't have enough food and water, that he died during that. Either way, he has been pronounced dead. He is Ishaq Mustafawi, hardly somebody that you would think came from England. And he was even interviewed by the BBC last October, I believe it was, while in jail. And the purpose of this is, of course, that anybody who fights for the Islamic State within Syria will attempt to either be killed or imprisoned by either the Syrian Democratic Forces or from the United States in particular, because, of course, you've got to remember that the way that the people live, the civilians within places like Syria, is horrific. The things that the Islamic State does to people are absolutely terrible. They're barbaric. They're exactly what the creator of the Quran, Muhammad, did. That is how bad they are. And, of course, they do try and use some newer technology in order to torture and inflict as much pain on their victims as possible. Of course, they view it as a kind of retribution to say, hey, if you're, let's say, an American pilot from the United States Air Force and you're dropping bombs on them, essentially you're raining fire on them, so they will burn you in a cage because then you're being consumed by fire just like you were trying to do to them. That is essentially how they view it. But as we can see, that the whole way of trying to run a society or a civilization like that doesn't work. It doesn't amount to anything worthwhile. It doesn't give meaning to people within those communities, and it does not give quality of life to anybody in those communities, whether they're a part of the faith or not. It doesn't work. It doesn't help. It's an utter shit show. So, when you have the civilians who are not embroiled in ISIS, but nonetheless are under their authoritarian, barbaric rule, they are really, really hoping that they're going to see over the hill the US troops, because Britain isn't big enough. The military isn't big enough. They're not involved enough for the individuals to be hoping for them, but they are hoping for the Star-Spangled Banner, their red, white and blue, to come over the hill in order to rescue them from the catastrophe that they found themselves in, possibly through no fault of their own, or possibly through partly their fault by going along with it. Similar to Solzhenitsyn writing in the Gulag Archipelago that how am I to blame for finding myself in the gulags from Stalin fighting Hitler, basically. So, well, as an individual, you think, well, you're not really to blame. But if you've gone along with communism and Stalin's way of doing things, then you are, in a way, at least in some small part, to blame for going along with it. Maybe you didn't have enough information at the time, but maybe there's something somehow, somewhere, you could have done something differently to be better educated and to either avoid that situation or to stop that situation from happening in the first place. Either way, the civilians who are not involved with ISIS do not wish to be involved in ISIS, and of course there's on the pain of death or worse waiting for them if they wish to fight back, in which case they're really, really hoping for intervention, whether you like it or not. The civilians who are not involved in ISIS, I assure you, adore intervention, adore the fact that there is hope that outside forces will actually come to help them and rescue them. And in any of these situations, whether it be domestic, if it's Syrian Democratic Forces, or if it's international or external, like the United States, then because we decide to practice the rule of law and investigate and then try to hold people accountable through more humane endeavours, we use prison instead of instant death. And although the death penalty, of course, still exists out there, it isn't done immediately. You still need to have that investigation and understanding what is happening to people. And then you've got international politics at play if they have citizenship of another country. You don't want to offend that country, especially if they're much bigger and stronger than you, because you don't want them to come down on you like a ton of bricks or worse. So, for that, they imprison the IS members, and if they're of British citizenship, as a very, very disappointingly large amount seem to be. Like, one is bad enough. If you had one person from Britain leave to join ISIS, which has declared war against the UK, that is a failure of the education system. That is a failure in community cohesion. That is a failure in British liberal values right there, and it needs to be addressed and assessed head on, because if you don't, then more will follow. Of course, this didn't happen. This is now a continuous problem, and not only do you see people going out there to join ISIS, but of course being sympathetic to the causes within the United Kingdom, the subversive fifth column, if you will. So, hey, I'm sure we can all agree that prison reform is overdue in the West, and things that the guards and the wardens get away with is a lot to be ashamed about. Things that happen even in prisons in the Middle East, like Abu Ghraib, that is also something to be ashamed about, and to try and work on a solution so that these things never happen again, and to realise that they can happen. And of course you've got Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment as a psychological test to see if it's actually true, and then followed up by the BBC as well, in order to see, is it just a thing about people when they get power, what needs to go for it. But yes, it clearly isn't as useful of a system as it could be. And when you get into prisons, and the state of Islam within prisons, of course, and the guards not wanting to go touch those gangs, that those gangs are off limits because of the political pressures from above, it's a very, very difficult balancing game to be hard enough on the inmates so that you can still keep some semblance of order in there, but not so much that you end up breaking bones or limbs or human rights violations, because when you're in the moment, you're not really thinking of the consequences. However, here they say that he was a 27-year-old held in a prison in northeast Syria controlled by the Kurdish-led US-backed Syrian Democratic Forces. Sources said he was one of around 10 British men and 30 British women being held by the militia, but he was the first to die in SDF custody. The prison where he was held is a converted school. When the BBC spoke to him there last October, he admitted joining the Islamic State. So they say we've got dozens who have been caught. So not just going out there, maybe being under the radar, coming back, or going out there, staying out there, not being caught. But no, those who have gone out there and been caught, we got 40. We got dozens of British citizens who have gone out there, which is most certainly a failure of, it could be the British immigration system or the British education system. And if you fix the British education system, you wouldn't have a problem with the immigration system, because you wouldn't let it happen in the first place. Which is why getting better educated is always a good thing. But a government spokesman told the BBC the Foreign Office had advised against all travel to Syria since 2011. They added those who chose to leave the UK and fight for or support Daesh potentially pose a very serious national security risk. Which is why we don't want them coming back to the UK, of course. And we had the whole debacle with Shamima Begum not so long ago as well. And it all makes perfect sense that you don't want to have somebody who has declared war against the UK coming back. Yes, of course, I do believe in redemption. But if it's so soon and something is so severe, I really want to give them more time to kind of figure themselves out, if you will. And they really have to go on that path to prove themselves. And the idea of prison sentences is to say that ideally, you're too much of a threat to society as it stands, and so we're going to make sure that you can't do this harm to anybody else. And in that time, this is how long we think it will take to rehabilitate you, so that you're not going to be the same person when you come out. That is the idea. So the more severe the crime, the more messed up the person, the more help they need. That is the idea. I know it does not happen as it is intended to be, but that is the intention behind it. So if you have somebody doing something as severe as joining a terrorist force that has waged war on this country, you do not want to let them back in scot-free after a few years. Obviously not. If you've got first-degree murder of just one person, then it's a life sentence. And things like that, murder and kidnapping and terrorist offences, do not have a statute of limitations on either. So it doesn't matter how long it's been, because normally statute of limitations is about 5 years. No matter how long it's been, they will still be prosecuted for it if they're found within the borders of the country. If the indictment happens, then they will. So, as they say, his Algerian family had settled in London when Mustafa was 5. Okay, not born or raised then, just raised. He was described as a popular, football-loving boy brought up in a home that was opposed to extremism, but he later became increasingly radicalized while a student. In April 2014, he told his father he was going to Amsterdam for a few days, leaving just a small bag, but then secretly made his way to Syria. In 2018, he had his British citizenship revoked, as well he should, no doubt about it. You don't want somebody a part of your country who decides to wage war with you. I think the quickest turnaround that we've seen would be from something like Operation Paperclip after the Second World War, where the Americans took the German scientists, and the Russians did the same thing, of course. So the country they were waging war with, they then wanted their top brains working for them, and they weren't imprisoned in those different countries, which is slightly different because you've got another threat to deal with, but nonetheless that's the quickest you'll find with somebody who has committed atrocities or war crimes or been at war with your country, that you will then take them in willingly. But somebody like this who has nothing to offer, no, of course not. And seeing as he became radicalized while a student, it goes back to the earlier point that there was a severe problem with the education system. In that, I don't mean to say it's this big faceless thing and blame the government, it's the education, but it's more than that, because it's all the media reporting, it's the syllabuses, it's the teachers, it's the hiring, it's the communities, it's anything that doesn't wish to describe Britain as a positive place. Obviously, every country makes mistakes. I'm not saying go down the China route, but you've really got to instill British liberal values. You've got to say that Britain has made past mistakes, has tried to make up for that, and it is something you can proud to be a part of, something you can proud to be within, something where you can make the best for yourself and others. And obviously, historically, people didn't feel that way, and they moved to America and have made a very successful country from that. So let's hope Britain has evolved since then. Otherwise, quite clearly, there is another far better way of doing things, and it's the American Constitution. But until we all move over there, we're with Britain, which has a very proud legacy, and it's worth remembering that where we've come from, the mistakes we've made, sure, how we've made up for them, and where we are today. And to try and not let people derail that and to tar us all with the same brush and suggest that Britain's been terrible, because that is the kind of thing that radicalises these people, and giving so much credence to Islam when it deserves none of it. So until next time, stay proud to be British, it's okay to be white, and we can't wait for Islam to end. And as always, have a good one.